I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, joined by my co-host, Michael Cohen. We previously discussed the news here how Donald Trump was too much of a coward to show up for the deposition in a case that Trump filed against Michael Cohen. We did another hot take on that. Go and check that out on our YouTube feed. But what I want to discuss, Michael Cohen, is this New York Attorney General civil fraud case against Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, other defendants, Don Jr., Eric Trump, has gone from really bad against Donald Trump to the really, really bad to devastating very quickly. Donald Trump lasted 2.5 days there, and it culminated with testimony. And these are all people you know. Weisselberg will testify next week, but Jeff McConney, the controller of the Trump Organization, testified on Thursday and Friday. And, you know, in some of these cases, you don't really have those Perry Mason moments, but here that took place on Friday, where McConney basically admitted that he engaged in fraudulent representations on the financials over the course of many years. He knew what he was doing was not lawful, but admitted to doing it because his boss, Weisselberg, directed him to do it. And now we knew McConney testified to some of this stuff at the Manhattan District Attorney case where the Trump Organization was convicted of over a dozen felonies, and the jury reached that conclusion after a very short while. But McConney was still working for the Trump Organization. That he doesn't work for them anymore. He testified earlier that his pay is contingent upon things which he doesn't even know. He hasn't gotten the full severance package. So he seemed more willing here to even testify than the types of things he did in the Manhattan District Attorney criminal case. And he just said, yeah, there's fraud. Weisselberg told me to do it. I felt I had no other option. We committed fraud. It was quite the mic drop moment. Does this surprise you at all, Cohen?
Well, look, I don't know specifically to what he testified to, what this specific fraud was. Obviously, there are no cameras in the courtroom, and the extent of the information that's being put out, by journalists that happen to be there at the courthouse doesn't go into the specifics. So I don't know exactly, but understand that McConney worked specifically and directly for Alan Weisselberg. And what the Attorney General, the prosecutors for the Attorney General, will be demonstrating or attempting to demonstrate at trial is the ongoing and persistent fraud and the misrepresentations in the statement of financial condition that dealt with the multitude of assets that were that constituted the Trump Corporation. And what McConney basically did, just based upon the headlines that you showed, is he validated exactly what the Attorney General's office is seeking to prove. Now, I will say this to you. My understanding is that this trial is supposed to be over approximately December 22nd. That's the date that Judge Engoron had stated that the trial would terminate. And I don't see how this is possible. And I think that there's too much leeway right now being afforded to defense counsel. And I understand Engoron's reasoning behind it, which I believe is, we all know that Trump is going to appeal the decision. He knows that he's already lost. He's thrown his hands up in the air, and his only hope is that somehow that there's an appeal that goes in his favor, which I just don't see happening. But he's already thrown his hands up, and what you're going to ultimately find is that the Attorney General's office has something like 160 names on their witness list, and defense Trump's folks have 80 something. They only went through two witnesses the entire first week. It started with Donald Bender from Meiselas, and it concluded with Jeff McConney. Well, yes, they got a lot of information out there, a lot of corroborating testimony that, as you said, drops the mic on this entire matter. But at the end of the day, there's still more people. And I understand from people who were there that they just kept asking the same question over and over and over. And I believe that, the judge, again, wants to be judicious, and I respect the court for that. But at some point in time, the asked and answered line by the attorney generals, prosecutors have to be, employed, and the judge then has to, grant it. Because if not, I can't imagine how many days that they're intending to have me on the stand. And again, Trump already knows he's lost the case. He's already lost the first count where Engoron ruled by motion that that the Trump Corporation committed fraud, which is now resulting in what's called the corporate death penalty, whereby they dissolve the corporation and they revoke the license to operate within the state of New York, meaning everything is going into receivership and will ultimately be sold off in order to handle whatever the amount that will be determined by Judge Engoron is due and owing to the state under disgorgement. So I'm not 100% certain what Jeff McConney, it's a little long-winded, but I think it's important to understand that McConney's testimony is clearly not going to benefit Trump, the Trump Corporation, or any of the folks that's there. My only concern is now that they know that they've lost and they've thrown their hands up, my fear, or I shouldn't even say fear, my concern is more that the defense counsel are going to act in ways, and not just with myself, but with others, that is not really appropriate, and it delays this, which certainly doesn't bode well.
Couldn't agree with you more there. So the way it looks like the New York Attorney General's office has been building this case is first kind of the outside accountants, though, when they had the Meiselas accountant, then they went in with the controller, then you're going to have Weisselberg, and then, I think we'll then start seeing some of the others, in Trump world. And what I would tell everybody, what I anticipate, because I've read some of the deposition testimony that's been put out there publicly so far, is you basically have Don Jr., Eric, Donald Trump, all saying that they don't know the statement of financial conditions, that they're not familiar with generally accepted accounting principles, and they don't know how any of this even happened, other than it seems like their plan was just blame the outside accounting firm. But the problem with that we saw this week is, one, that's not actually a defense. The outside accounting firm isn't on trial. But Jeff McConney also said, no, actually, all of the disclaimer stuff that Trump talked about, all of the statement of financial conditions, all had either said Trump is responsible or Donald J. Trump final review. And Cohen, more than anybody, that when Donald Trump says that he's not familiar with these financials, or that Eric was the one who did the statement of financial conditions, and Eric said, I never seen the statement of financial conditions. That's why Judge Engoron has said, what you are saying, Trump, as part of your defense, in the global use of the word Trump, makes no sense at all. That's why Trump just goes out there and just attacks the media, because they are so bereft of evidence, and anything they have is so just pointing the fingers at each other. I've seen devastating testimony, but like this is like smoking gun.
But the only issue here is, and the concern for Trump is to delay this, which is what he tried to do with my case, delay it so long that it gets to the point where the election in 2024 is either right there or has just occurred. And his one big hope is that he wins the election, and then we'll figure out how to make all of this disappear, how to save himself using the office of the presidency to do so. Now, just to be a little bit more clear, that the New York Appeals Court declined to halt, because Trump's attorneys made a motion. They made multiple motions to halt the ongoing fraud trial, but they did put a temporary halt on Judge Engoron's order to cancel the business certificates and appoint the receivers. Now, this again, in Trump's mind, is a massive win. He also thought that he was going to be able to start transferring assets out of the Trump Corporation, the New York assets, but that, of course, is not going to happen. Tish James, the Attorney General, has already ensured that there'll be no sales or hypothecation of any of the assets, especially the ones that are here in New York. So, how fast this appeals court will ultimately determine this second part to the order, I don't know, but I suspect it will be quick. One of the last things that I wanted to say is that Weisselberg is taking the stand next. And obviously, many of the questions that were asked of Jeff McConney will be asked to Weisselberg. And there's no doubt in my mind that Weisselberg has already corroborated the testimony that McConney had made. So now not only will they have McConney making the statements, but they'll have Weisselberg make the same or acknowledge the validity of those statements. And once again, you were right, Ben. It is devastating to the Trump Corporation.
And I'm doing another hot take where I just focus on the appellate division's order where it stays the dissolution of the Trump organization. That's not a surprise order. I was surprised that Trump's lawyers waited so long to bring it, but it's the standard order that the Court of Appeals would make in a situation like that, because while it is reviewing the appeal, if the underlying entity is dissolved first, you can't unring that bell if the appellate division decision is different. So it's basically a gimme. If you file that, it would automatically be granted. But they waited a little, oddly, way too long to bring it. So they weren't able to stop the trial. Frankly, I think if they brought the motion to stay the trial promptly right after the summary judgment, I think that would have been granted too. I just think their lawyers screwed up, or they wanted to have this trial take place. But in any event, I'll cover that in a new hot take. Michael Cohen, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Everybody check out Michael Cohen and my Patreon at patreon.com/political beatdown, and make sure you subscribe to the Political Beatdown podcast. Have a good day.
Hey, Midas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.